Hey everyone, this is Mark Goldberg with UN Dispatch speaking with.
Esperanza Garcia, the founder of the Philippine Youth Climate Movement.
Great, and so well, thank you so much for speaking with me. And my condolences. Just awful, sort of an awful situation. I think the latest report I saw, and we're recording this on Tuesday afternoon, is that there are something like 4 million people displaced, about 13 million people affected by the storm. Maybe just to start things off, I want to ask you what made this storm? I mean, the Philippines is no stranger to natural disasters. What made sort of this storm so, I guess, unique?
Thank you, Mark. Thank you again for having me here at UN Dispatch. And you're right, Philippines does get hit by an average of 20 typhoons annually. And this year, this typhoon Haiyan is the 24th. Is very unusual, as it's the 24th that's hit us. We are geographically situated by the Pacific Ocean, and there these storms are created due to the strength of the storms are created due to the warm temperatures in the ocean, in the atmosphere. And as we increase our anthropogenic or human-induced climate change pollution, it actually causes the atmosphere to increase in heat or cause the temperature to warm. Therefore, as these storms are creating, and with the warm temperatures, there is broad scientific consensus that the frequency of these storms are not increasing in number. However, they are increasing in strength. Though it has not been proven directly that climate change is the fault of this, I I do believe that though Typhoon Haiyan is the strongest typhoon to have hit land, the worst has yet to come, and this could happen not only in the Philippines, but it could happen to any country, really.
And so this the storm also comes at a time when just alluding to what you were talking about before, when negotiators from around the world are meeting in Warsaw right now for what's called COP19, the Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, which is a shorthand way of saying that it's the international climate change negotiations to figure out what should replace the Kyoto Protocol when it expires in 2015. And these are just sort of permanently sort of stuck negotiations. And one thing that sort of has caught sort of the international sort of press's attention for once about something happening on the international climate negotiation front is that this storm struck obviously in the midst of these negotiations, and the lead negotiator for the Philippines promptly went on hunger strike after making this really impassioned plea to do something finally about climate change and to take concrete steps at the meeting in Warsaw to do something about the situation. How was this delegate sort of hunger strike received in the Philippines? Are people even talking about it, or are they sort of too preoccupied with sort of reconstruction and relief efforts? Or I guess how has this played out in the press in the Philippines?
Yebsiano has been a strong.
So his name is Yeb Sano. Yeah.
Yes. Yab who is the Philippine delegate of the UN climate change negotiation. He's also a climate change commissioner of the Philippine Climate Change Commission. And he had a very strong, heartfelt message for the Philippines, as he was also, his family was directly affected, and his brother was the one who he had mentioned was picking up dead bodies while going on food and water without days. And this was happening to thousands of people. His strong appeal was very strong in the international media. Speaking with friends in the local borders, they've also been being moved by his speech. I know many friends who join him in the climate fast. They're also I have friends outside of the Philippines who have fasted. The Yale University students 2, 3 days ago fasted for one day. The forestry and environmental school students to join YEB in solidarity with the Philippines. This climate justice fast has not happened. I need to note that this climate justice fast has not just happened here. During this time by Yabsiano. This had also happened back in 2009 when youth from all over the world fasted for 40 days in the lead up to the climate change conference in Copenhagen in 2009. This is a call to action by youth globally and by Yeb to say, you know, when people fast, it's as if there's nothing else that can be done. And in the case of the UN climate change negotiations, many people feel helpless as these negotiations have been going on now for as long as I've been living, at least, and yet nothing has been done. And so it really is a strong message to say, you know, we need to act now. And Yeb, I believe, is still going on his fast for climate and fasting in solidarity with his country.
Yeah, it's a strong message, but you know, it doesn't seem, at least you know, from what I'm seeing of the negotiations, it doesn't seem to be moving. I mean, it's moving, but it's not actually sort of inspiring entrenched positions to give up their entrenched positions and come to compromise and make progress towards a comprehensive international climate negotiation, which is obviously terribly unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you about the city of Tacloban. So this is sort of ground zero. This is where the storm hit the hardest. It's a city I've never heard of before. Can you sort of, I guess, describe the city before the storm, who inhabited it, population, what the industries were, and what it'll take to sort of get the city back on its feet again?
Sure. I've only visited Tacloban once when I was working in the Senate. My job had entailed educating and visiting youth in schools and universities about climate change. And when I was there, my experience was that it was a very friendly city. A lot of international people visited to as it's a city of Tacloban is in Leyte, which is a province in the Philippines. It is southeast of Manila. Manila is the capital city of the Philippines. I've read that it has a population of 250,000. It's a highly urbanized city, and before. Post what had happened in Haiyan is that the town had been wrecked, including its airport. So the first few days, aid was very difficult to reach the city because there were no airplanes that could arrive in the airport. And once that was cleared out, the airport, as I've been told, isn't even big enough to manage the big airplanes. So many of the relief distribution has been positioned in bigger airports like Cebu, which formerly was a military base, and then delivered in the smaller Tacloban airport. Tacloban is a city where a lot of people thrive on tourism, but they also have their economy is based, they have the lowest poverty incidence in the country. They have a poverty incidence that's about 30%, and many of the people live under $1.25 daily. The economy also strives on education. There are 4 or 5 main universities in Tacloban. So many of the residents there are there during the week and then maybe go home in the weekends to visit their families.
So it should be, I mean, theoretically, you're describing a city that ought to be, I think, more resilient than most. Just in terms of having some base level of prosperity or relative prosperity. But you also described that it's been totally sort of wiped out. My understanding is that but is sort of the same as yours with the airport situation. The airport was basically sort of destroyed. They got it functioning, but as you said, it's such a small airport they can only do sort of one plane at a time. But we're recording this on Tuesday, the 19th, and I was on a press call, like last week or late last week, with some U.S. officials who said that an overland route is now available. So aid is sort of finally starting to trickle in and starting to reach some of the affected populations. Although one thing that I've read recently is that sort of some of the more rural villages haven't been reached by aid agencies, and so I think we have sort of yet to see the full scope of the damage because again, like these rural areas have not yet been reached.
That's a very good point that you bring up there, because in addition, it's not just Tacloban that has been hit. You're right. Many other regions have been hit as well. And to this date, I have friends who are delivering aid and the aid that they're providing is not matching the needs of the people who need them. But they're telling me that these regions that they're reaching out to have either, number one, not have been provided aid yet, and we are on the 9th day since the typhoon had hit. And they haven't received any national government aid or international aid from charity organizations, or they've only received aid once, and people there are growing hungry. Tacloban may be just one region, but my hometown, Cebu, in the northern area, has been hit too. There's also other islands. My friends and I have been delivering goods to Malapascua, to Ormoc, to Bantayan Island. Haiyan has also been affected mostly, and in these communities, the whole entire community has been wiped out, as in 95% of the homes do not have any roofs. And yeah, it's aid is slowly trickling in, and
So I wanted, so obviously, there's a large Filipino diaspora population here in the United States. I guess what has been the overall, sort of how have the diaspora population experienced this crisis? Obviously, relating to their family and friends who are directly affected. What's been the response so far?
um, and one of the most heartwarming stories that I've heard is from a personal friend. She lives in Arizona. Her father was in Tacloban in the midst of a storm, and she had lost contact with him for days. Of course, there was a sense of worry, but as he documented his story, he was able to find ground and contact in 3 days, and it wasn't until four days after the storm had hit when she was able to be notified and learn that her father was alive. And this is happening to many families that are outside the Philippines. There are many loved ones who have been hit and are still lost to this date, or have not had any contact to their family members in their hometown because communication lines have been cut. Um, and many there was a CNN story that I had read just recently of a maid of a house helper who had to fly from Hong Kong to find her family on foot, and she was able to find them. However, they didn't have any more food and water. In terms of aid, the international community, in addition to the Philippine community outside the Philippines, have been incredible. There have been a lot of fundraisers. I know of, at least I'm here in San Francisco. There's also many in New York from friends that I know who are trying to rally their friends globally to help in the home front, which has been very inspiring. It's been very who knew that you can find inspiration in such a tragic situation, but to see the local, national, international community come together to help those in need has been uplifting.
So speaking about the international community, I mean that's sort of what I follow the closest. So they are asking for $301 million for this initial phase of response, and I think something that probably most people are not terribly aware of is that there's actually like a pretty regularized system for dealing with natural disasters like this, like after they this, like the Haiti earthquake and any other sort of natural disaster. There's sort of a way and a mechanism that the international community responds that sort of orbits around the UN, but doesn't involve exclusively UN agencies. And sort of this, and so these agencies, sort of, I think one of the most unfortunate things about the way in which the international community has decided to deal with natural disasters like this, though, is that when a disaster strikes, the agencies that are first responders on the ground, like UNICEF or the World Food Program or Save Children or the Red Cross, have to ask for charity before they can really pay for their response. Like there's no standing pool of funds, or there's not a lot of standing pool of money to deal with these crises. And so they have to raise the money in order to mount the humanitarian response. And right now they're asking for $301 million, and so far they've raised about 20% of that. Although that number should grow as more countries and more donors start to step up to the plate. But you know, it's a slow and it's a you know it's a pretty intense process, I think. And I'm wondering, I guess, how have folks on the ground interacted with, or to your knowledge, are sort of experiencing sort of the international aspect of this sort of crisis response?
You mean how they're receiving the aid?
Yeah, I mean, how are they receiving the aid? Are they upset that the sort of international aid isn't coming fast enough? Are they gratified? I mean, what, I guess, is your sense of how people that you speak to, that your sort of friends and family, are sort of experiencing sort of the international aid system sort of taking effect in the
Right.
Philippines?
Well, in addition to, I'll just speak in general, government aid, international aid in general, and these are just personal stories of friends. I have friends who are trying to borrow boats from families who own them because there are, as I mentioned previously, there are some areas in the Philippines that are still not receiving aid, and to them, they have to have that sense of urgency of saying, you know, I need to take action because either the aid provided from the government is not adequate, or even international aid. Um, to receive the immediate assistance. Um, and there is a lot of international aid, which is great. I know that the UK and the US, as you have written in your articles, Mark, and Australia are the biggest donation providers. But what I see is very inspiring are these grassroots movements of citizens who see that there is trauma happening, that there is, if I don't deliver, if I don't provide assistance now, there will be lives at stake. But also, what I'm hearing from them is that, you know, it's been longer than a week now, is that we shouldn't only address immediate aid, but we need to rehabilitate these communities, because not only can that I hope that these international aid will go not only to building people's lives, but also rebuilding communities, to prevent risks again, to ensure that these homes and infrastructures are resilient, are in safer ground, and are enable the residents and the Filipinos to create livelihoods that will provide them with long-term benefits. The government also, and it's unfortunate this has to provide a lesson for them, but they have to ensure that that there must be effective implementation of early actions as soon as we are given early warnings. Um, uh, I don't think that there was enough preparation. And I don't necessarily put blame on anyone, but because this, it's just as a developing country, it's very difficult to be prepared for the biggest storm that's ever hit land. Um, but uh, in terms of laws and policies, the the Philippines has, as Maria Ressa, who used to work for CNN and now runs Rappler, she says that the Philippines has the best laws on disaster risk management. But what we fail on is the implementation of these laws in climate change and disaster risk because of bureaucracy, because of corruption. And these laws and policies don't really mean much until we can implement them in the real world. And as you had mentioned, first responders who have been incredible in trying to raise funds. We don't only educate the first responders, but also, more importantly, the people who are in the path of these natural disasters, in the path of these storms. A successful story is I don't know if you know this, but the former mayor of San Francisco, Cebu, Alfred Arquilano, who's also a champion of the United Nations Office of Disaster Risk Reduction, was able to save lives. He has been preparing for many years now to strengthen community preparedness and reduce disaster risk in a catastrophe like this. And he was able to evacuate 1,000 people in a community called Tulang Diot. And due to this, he was able to move everyone to safety. And there was, although they've lost their homes, there was not one casualty had happened. We need stronger leadership. And we need more leaders. Although many of our politicians have a lot of power, not all of them really are educated enough or know how to react to crisis like this.
So it's interesting the point you make that sort of like the sort of quality of the leader on the local level had a direct impact on how residents under that leader's control or in that leader's city or sort of jurisdiction sort of experience the storm. That's something I haven't sort of seen sort of written about. So that's pretty interesting take. On the flip side, I mean, how serious is the issue of corruption? Because I mean, there's going to be an effort to rebuild, and I think a great worry is that you can't rebuild stronger if the mechanisms for rebuilding are corrupt.
Yeah. There was an interview by the Albay governor, who's also the United Nations Framework of Climate Change Convention Green Climate Fund chairman, who was Governor Salceda, who had an interview recently, and he had mentioned that he is, by his own eyes, he is seeing corruption. Even now in the relief aid. He had mentioned how was seeing generals and individuals pay money in the port so that their vehicles could be able to go in the port faster, which delays the shipping of goods to the places that are in need. So corruption has always been a massive problem in our country, which is very unfortunate. Corruption is what is stalling many of the climate change laws, the renewable energy laws, the disaster risk laws, the kind of actions that we need in order to prevent risks like this in being implemented, and it is unfortunate.
I guess so. I guess what's next? Do you think for the Philippines? I guess what I mean. We're still in this very sort of early emergency relief phase, where parts of your country are being inundated by international relief agencies. But soon that phase will be over, and sort of more long-term rebuilding will take place. What needs do you see as being most pressing as we sort of turn the corner to that phase?
Yeah, very good question, Mark. The In addition to this immediate relief aid that is being provided now, I had mentioned it's rebuilding communities, really. But some examples could be, number one, we are a country of 7,107 islands. There are many homes that are based in the coast. What needs to be done is to relocate these homes, these who will eventually be affected, um, elsewhere. So to prevent them from either losing their lives or end their homes in future storm surges. Another example could also be we have to strengthen natural protection from storm surges, which can be done through mangrove reforestation. And or rehabilitating coastal wetlands. There are many adaptation techniques that will enable the Philippines to help adapt to the climate change that is exacerbating and that we're clearly experiencing repeatedly. Um, and Another example could also be what the Philippines could do is build stronger schools. Many of the public schools were used as emergency shelters. They could build schools that could help them withstand, but many of these emergency shelters were also effective in the storm. So building stronger schools, which also provides the youth to have a place to be educated. But all of this can be done, Mark. The problem is really making the system more efficient. And I would suggest, perhaps building an agency to ensure that the money, or not necessarily an agency, but a team to ensure that the implementation is being done well, that there is no corruption, to ensure that the money is going to the right place, to hold accountability, because that's one of the weaknesses in the government right now, is that there's just no way to account where the money is going. And it's unfortunate that that's happening. But we are definitely experiencing how corruption is destroying our nation. And we can improve through that. What the Philippines is strong in, we're weak in adaptation measures, but we're strong in mitigation efforts. We have strong renewable energy laws. We are the second in the world in terms of geothermal energy. We have the first wind farm in Southeast Asia, which is based in Luzon region. We have the first solar farm in Southeast Asia, the biggest solar farm in Southeast Asia, which is in the Mindanao region. And we are currently at 40% renewable energy, and we're aiming with our renewable energy law, which was passed in 2009, to reach for 50% renewable energy. So we are contributing to the solutions. But we need to build stronger adaptation measures and be prepared better for the future, because this is not the strongest typhoon that will hit us, I don't think. There's going to be another one, and there's going to be more lives that will be lost, and we just need to prepare for that better.
So you said that sort of the Philippines is contributing to sort of climate change mitigation efforts, but it would seem that the countries that are sort of most responsible and for the sort of junk that's already in the atmosphere, like the United States and Western Europe, have a special, I think, moral responsibility to help a country like the Philippines adapt to the effects of the climate change. I mean, we caused this problem, and you, the Philippines, are feeling the effects of what we've done for the past 100 years. And this, I think, is at the heart of what we're talking about in the beginning of this conversation, of what's the stuck climate change negotiations underway right now in Warsaw. And it just seems that like this is yet another example of how the poorest, most vulnerable countries and places in the world are feeling the effects of climate change that we in the wealthier countries are far more responsible for. But interestingly enough, you're saying now that sort of I think probably because the Philippines is more on the front lines of climate change than we are in the United States, or we recognize that we are in the United States, that the Philippines seems to be taking these mitigation efforts very seriously. So that's actually something I had not sort of considered or heard of before, but that's sort of an interesting way forward, I think.
You're absolutely right, Mark. The Philippines is contributing to 0.28% of the carbon dioxide emissions, while the top 10 countries in the world, which does include the United States, are contributing to 67%. And yet we meaning developing countries, suffer an inordinately high cost in experiencing these climate weathers. I mean, as you know, Maldives is already, and there are countries out there that are talking about relocating their whole entire country because they're going to go underwater in the next 20, 30 years. And so Philippines is not the only one that is experiencing this. Unfortunately, as the scientists have studied, the climate change is only going to become worse. Philippines may be leading an example, but it's only due to the fact that we feel it in our country. We feel the storm surges. We feel the droughts. We feel that we're losing 5% of our economy annually due to storms. I've read that this is going to cost us. This storm surge is going to cost us around between like 18 billion. The last one, Typhoon Bofa, cost us $1 billion. But we simply cannot afford it as a developing country to keep losing our economy. Not only the farmers who depend and rely on agriculture, who feed their families with that, no longer have the ability to have farms. The boatmen and the fishermen who fish and use their boats as their own livelihood no longer have their boats to provide them with the means to survive. They're losing their families, they're losing their homes, they're losing the livelihood to provide them with the means to continue. This is injustice, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's absolute injustice, and I guess what's so deeply unsatisfying is that there does not seem to be a way sort of out of this. I mean, there is this idea of like a climate, adaptation finance fund, so that wealthier countries would help countries like the Philippines implement adaptation techniques. And there's, in theory, the in Copenhagen in the last big International Climate Conference, it was agreed that this climate fund would be sort of funded, but it really hasn't been, and that's just, I mean, it's a shame, and it's hard to see how we can navigate sort of ourselves out of this morass unless we sort of come together and sort of recognize everyone's unique roles and responsibilities in dealing with this.
I agree.
Okay. I've preached. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want the world at large to know before we sign off?
There is one thing, and there if you have a child, if you have
I do.
And we're both parents.
This is not theoretical for me.
We're both parents, Mark, and that is why we engage in these discussions and solutions. But there are other people out there, and a big population out there are not accepting or don't really believe or don't know about what's happening really about this climate change phenomenon that we're experiencing, and it's a plea. Really, it's not for me, but for our children, Mark, to be part of the solution, There are many things that you as an individual can do, but there are many things that governments and private sector can do to help alleviate future disasters to come, and that is by acting now. We can, um, build more renewable energy, push for more renewable laws. We can plant more trees. We can educate our children on recycling. We can build sustainable homes. We can build resilient infrastructures. There's so many solutions out there that are in front of us. And what we need to do is to adapt to them, to push for them, and make it a lifestyle, make it a sustainable lifestyle. Um, because if we don't act now, um, it this is not only going to hit the Philippines, but the world will and other countries will definitely will be affected. So that's just a plead for the younger generation, because it's we just don't have it too late. We don't have, we can have a plan B, but we don't have a planet B. We only have one world, and we need to take care of it.
Well, Esperanza, thank you so much for this. And again, my condolences, and urge everyone to do what they can to support the relief and recovery efforts. So thank you so much.
Mark, thank you. You're very well informed. You're an incredible host, and thank you for having me in this interview. I'm very honored.